You mentioned that you were kind of a pop culture maven, interested in music and American culture and all that. I know a lot of people are interested in your experience as an actual performer with Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers. Have you ever considered doing anything about that?
Jonathan, if you're watching, I have thought about it a lot. I have thought about it a lot. It's on some level I would love to do it. And it wouldn't just be about, in my mind, it wouldn't just be about Jonathan. It would also be about the rest of us, because there were many versions of the Modern Lovers. And some of the earlier versions of the Modern Lovers had some of the most famous people in it. You know, people who went on to be in the Cars and the Talking Heads, and you know, there were. Jonathan had a really interesting role in a certain era of rock music, and it wasn't just by putting his own music out there, which is stuff that I have always loved. I was always a fan before I became a member of the band. But it's also because he, you know, sort of launched these other performers who went on to do other things. And so I think that's pretty cool. So I've met a lot of those guys, and I do think there's lots of funny stories. Yeah. I mean, Jonathan is an iconoclast, really interesting guy, and quirky in ways that don't relate to any of the things you think about when you think about rock and roll. Right. You know, sometimes when people hear was in a band, they say, "Oh, sex and drugs and rock and roll," and it's like, no, none of those. You know, very different vibe, very different approach to music, but interesting nonetheless. And especially now when I look back on how he was, I think of how he launched, you know, a whole realm of music. Sort of some of his influence was in punk, some of his influences, for lack of a better term, the sort of geek rock, you know, guys with buttoned up collars and funny glasses and
writing about esoteric,
chewing gum wrappers and things. So, you know, it's really an important topic. Having said all that, Jonathan is a guy who really keeps very tight control over what he does, in a way that a lot of performers don't. And so sometimes I think about talking to him about it, but I haven't. And maybe now that this is out there, maybe I will have to talk to him about it. But I think it would be cool, and I think, but I think it might end up being in the realm of personal documentary again, because I think it would have to, by default, it would have to acknowledge that I was a member of the band, and that we have this relationship. I don't think I could do it just about him. I think it would have to be like what those years were like for me, the break it was for me to be in a band when it was the last thing I thought I was going to be doing. And the experiences of being in a band for 3 years where we toured a lot, and the relationships we all had, which were, a band is really more like siblings on some level, and all the good and bad that goes with that. So I think that would be really funny if I could wrap my head around it, and then of course if Jonathan would agree to do it. And he might, I just haven't asked, so. Well,
I'm glad you brought up the personal documentary thing, because the other seminar that you offered here was about personal documentary, and we got to see some of your film, The Blinking Madonna, which I was impressed by the narrative quality of it. I think it's just very entertaining films. If you don't like documentaries, watch this movie anyway. It's a great story. The characters are wonderful. I mean, it's not an action movie. Things don't blow up, but the pacing is great.
Oh, thank you.
It's very, very user friendly. I mean, I can't imagine anybody not being sort of drawn into it. You know, what are some of the key things you think are necessary to do that with a documentary about yourself? The balance between navel gazing and...
Yeah, well, I think the big thing that we talked about this morning is shoring up your courage and going for it, and believing that you have something to say, and that and trusting that if you're completely honest and you deal with it in a certain way, you can make it a universal thing. So it's not just navel gazing. It's not just about you. It says something to a broader public. But it's scary because if you're at all sensitive to an audience, which most filmmakers are or should be, you start to second guess yourself. So I think the big trick is once you've shored up your courage, you need to create, massage, put it out there with lots of feedback from trusted advisors, and then after that from people who know nothing about you. Because the trusted advisors can call you on your stuff. In my case, in that film, a lot of people had a problem with the tone in certain parts that I didn't even hear. It was the whole notion of sounding sarcastic when I was trying to be funny, but it was really coming off as being flippant. And I didn't know it. I had done that, and then I realized that it wasn't even in the way I had written it. It was partly in the way I was narrating it. And it was a protective thing. I was trying to...
And this topic was, the topic has a religious theme, so do you think that made it even more delicate?
A little bit. I mean, and on one level, I very much wanted to and still do respect the beliefs of my friends who are depicted in the film, who are part of this Italian-American religious group. But on another level, I wanted to be true to where I was with my own spirituality, which was in a very different place than the stuff I had been raised on as a kid in Catholic school. So I was trying to find that place where I could identify that there was a spiritual component that had to do for me with being part of a community and recognizing the value of old symbolism and old beliefs that had to do with peace and nurturing and all those things that I think almost everybody in the world has some connection to. So I was trying to find that place, and so that was a big challenge. And there was also just the idea that I wasn't out to really critique the Catholic Church, but there was going to be some of that implied in certain parts, so I wanted to be careful about how I handled that so that it wasn't gratuitously flippant. Right.
And you didn't get any complaints along those lines?
No, I didn't. I was surprisingly, I got a lot of support. A lot of support from the people who were in it and the people who were from those constituencies, but also I showed it at Notre Dame University. That was the first screening, actually.
Wow, that's
to nuns and priests.
Yeah.
At the behest of my friend Robert Orsi, who is a religious studies professor. And at the time I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like a great thing. And then as the date approached, I was like, what did I just agree to? Like, what am I doing? Right into the lion's den. And I got up there and I showed it to several hundred nuns and priests and other Catholic scholars. And they really liked it. And the Q&A afterwards was very funny because I had depicted nuns of a certain era, and some of those nuns were in the audience. Some of them were from the same order, and they just had fun with me. It was really great. One of them was like, "Hello, I'm Sister, Regis Philbin from the Sisters of St. Joseph," and the audience just roared because they knew what was coming. But it was great. It was great. I got a nice review in the Jesuit magazine, America. One of the nicest reviews, very complex, very incredible comprehension of what I was trying to do. I was really touched. So,
that's great.
Go figure.